Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, Microsoft Office 365 to Empower Your Not-for-Profit. My name is Sakina Vora, and I'm the Volunteer Events and Marketing Officer here at Connecting Up. Our speaker today is Marcus Harvey. As Consulting and ICT Services Manager at InfoExchange, Marcus is responsible for providing advice to not-for-profits across Australia and New Zealand to help them make the most of technology. His team has already migrated scores of not-for-profits to Office 365, giving him practical knowledge about how to make the most of the cloud. So before I hand over to Marcus, just wanted to go through some housekeeping notes. To those who are new, please feel free to type in your questions in the question box, and we will try and make sure to answer all the questions during or at the end of the presentation. If you're facing any technical issues, like if you're having any audio issues or are unable to see the slides, please type in those issues as well and we will get it sorted out for you. This presentation is being recorded, so everyone present will receive an email with a link to the recording and slides by end of day today. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Marcus.
Thanks very much. It's fabulous to be talking to everyone today. Now, if there's questions throughout, please don't hesitate to type them in, because I suppose one of the things we're very keen to do is answer questions as we go, or if there's significant things after, I may say let's leave that till later and happy to have further conversations post-webinar or at the very end of the webinar if that's important. I'm here to talk about Office 365 and how it can empower your non-profit. If you're not already aware, in Australia, Office 365 is now available free of charge to charities or non-profits. It has been available in New Zealand for those people that are attending from New Zealand for some time now. So before I just talk more about Office 365, I want to talk about why I see it as important. And that's because, from my perspective, everyone on the line that talks about that's here and helps organisations get the most out of technology, it's really important for them to make the most of staff and volunteer time, and technology is one key element of allowing people to do that. It's really hard to be efficient in your job if you have slow computers, or if it's hard to find files, or if it's difficult to collaborate effectively. And even though volunteers may be free, if we don't make the most of their time, there's a real challenge in terms of how you achieve outcomes with those. And measuring outcomes is another area that's really important, because from our perspective there's more and more pressure on the sector to measure outcomes and measure what you do with the clients and communities you serve, and that's much easier if you keep your information in an electronic format rather than on paper, and Office 365 can help with that process. And minimising service risk is the other one. It's really important to keep your servers and your PCs and all your information accessible, and if you don't do that well, then people can't work effectively. The work we've done has shown that most non-profits feel they spend too much on IT, and most non-profits are not satisfied with their investment. Let me have a brief chat about that a little bit more. So this slide that is up on the screen shows some spend data. So in terms of what non-profits are spending, you can see up the top part, there was a study in Victoria which is still going, which shows that a number of large ICT services that's characterised by reliability because there's usually inbuilt redundancy. Data is stored on multiple servers, usually across multiple sites. There's expandability. It's easy to add or to remove users as your programs increase or decrease. There's usage-based pricing, which reduces a lot of challenges around capital investment to replace servers, and it's accessible over the internet so people can work anywhere. We've already migrated a score of non-profits to Office 365. We also install local infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit about what's appropriate. For many or for some organisations, depending on your size, usually a mixed model is appropriate, partly with Office 365, partly with local infrastructure. So what is the Office 365 E1 plan? I mean, I'm only going to cover this very quickly because it is also covered in a second webinar, which is connecting a post in more detail, but it includes professional email and shared calendaring, up to 50 gigabytes per user. It includes instant messaging, high-definition video and audio conferencing and screen sharing. It includes online storage up to more than a terabyte, in fact, for collaboration and document management through SharePoint, and it has strong privacy and security controls, which I'll cover in a bit more detail in a minute. So that's all provided by 5 applications, if you like: Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, OneNote Online, and Link, and 2 server-style or back-end products, being Exchange Online and SharePoint. And together they provide Office 365, which Microsoft is providing free of charge in the E1 plan for eligible non-profits. The benefits that we see from organisations that use Office 365 include that staff can work effectively and efficiently and stay connected anywhere. One of the challenges that we see people overcoming through Office 365 is that anywhere with an internet connection, if you have an internet connection, you can access your information anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you've got a Mac, whether you've got a PC, whether you've got an Android phone or an iPhone or a Microsoft phone, you have the ability to access your information. It's also easy to connect with staff, to access the latest version of a document, or to collaborate independent of location, because it makes it simple to find your information, and it's a lot more responsive than actually trying to connect through a VPN through slow connectivity solutions, and to allow people to work where they are and where they need to. The other thing that's really important is that staff can forget about technology and can get on with their jobs. One of the challenges that we hear about is the challenge of keeping servers up to date and making sure that they always have are at the supported level, and it can cost a fair bit in order to upgrade servers to the latest software stacks. And by moving into the cloud with Office 365, server upgrades are reduced or eliminated. That gives you lower technology costs. Backup and redundancy is no longer a headache because it's automatically looked after. Flexibility to scale up or down as required is provided. And it's very easy to add a new user or remove a user as you need to, whether they be a volunteer, whether they be a staff member, it doesn't matter. Availability is guaranteed. I think Microsoft guarantees 99.9% availability. The last 3 months they've actually achieved 99.99% availability, which is much better than a number of the organisations that we've worked with have been able to achieve with their on-premise infrastructure. There's also strong security and privacy controls. Many of the controls that are in place are the sorts of controls that I've seen when I've worked with large companies, and is quite difficult for many non-profits to achieve given their size and funding constraints.
Hi, Marcus. I'll just interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Janet. What happens if your internet goes down?
Great question, Janet. And I do cover it on a slide in a minute. I'll also cover it briefly here. Essentially, what we recommend to all organisations using Office 365 is you need a strategy when your internet goes down. You can take information offline. So for instance, if you use Outlook, all your emails are stored locally on your Outlook client. You can still read your emails, you can still write emails, and they're just stored until you get your internet back up. Similarly, if you decide to use SharePoint for document access, you can take a copy of your important documents offline and they can be automatically synced with your PC so you can work effectively as well. We do recommend that all organisations think about what happens when their internet goes down and have a plan to deal with that. For some organisations, that might be because it can take a day or two if your internet connection goes down to your office for whatever reason. Sometimes it can be back up in an hour. If it's a cabling fault, it might take a lot longer, depending on how long the internet provider takes to fix it. So we recommend organisations have a strategy to deal with that, which can be staff go and work from home, which can be staff work off their offline files, or can be staff go to an internet cafe for the afternoon and work.
We have another question here from,
yes.
Donna. On the E1 plan, can staff access Office 365 via tablet or mobile phones?
So you can access Office 365 on tablet and mobile phones. I'm just going back to the previous slide. And you get everything. So for instance, you can access SharePoint, you can use Link, you can access your emails, you can use Word Online. What you don't get with the E1 plan on tablets and mobile phones is you don't get a local copy of Word or a local copy of PowerPoint. For those organisations where that's important for some of their users, we've seen organisations take out the E3 plan for those people that need it.
We'll take two more questions.
Are there any other questions? Yep.
Before we move on to the presentation, this is from Joy. Can a user choose to restore a specific backup of a file, like 2 weeks ago?
So what you can configure, and this is what we generally recommend, is configure SharePoint to keep old versions of files. Okay, so that every time there is a file, you can restore it. Every time there's changes to a file, a user is actually able to go back to that previous version. If a file is deleted by mistake, a user, yes, can restore the file from what is the recycle bin from the SharePoint server, and the users have the access to do that or can readily have the access to do that. You need to do that before it gets purged from the recycle bin. From my memory, that's a month, but I might need to double check that if that was important.
Last question here from Mark. Can you let staff access email but not store organizational documents on the online storage?
And the answer to that is yes, you can. Just the same way as you can put security across a file server, you can set up folders where staff have no access. You can set up no documents on the server. So yes, that's very easy to do.
That was the last question, Marcus. We can go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic. So why Office 365 over other options? There's more than 1 terabyte of storage per user. You get 50 gigabytes of email, 1 terabyte of OneDrive storage, and you get storage for SharePoint. That's 10 gigabytes plus 500 meg per user. You get online document editing with native Microsoft Office, with a native Microsoft Office interface. We've used Google Apps before for a number of our clients, and for those people that aren't used to it, there's been some challenges with using or interfacing with Microsoft Office file formats. There's also a range of other features within SharePoint, which is probably the topic of a much longer conversation. You can develop your website in SharePoint, an intranet in SharePoint. You can edit documents collaboratively within SharePoint. There's a whole range of features within SharePoint that can really boost productivity and collaboration within an organisation. The privacy and security controls are independently verified. It's free for eligible non-profits in 41 countries, and as I mentioned, that now includes Australia. And there's no secondary use of data. Microsoft doesn't scan for advertising or analytics at all. And they've also recently updated their privacy statements to clarify their position on that. One of the biggest challenges we find is the privacy and security question, and because really the issue is if you're moving your data from somewhere that you control, that means a server in your office, and moving it into someone else's data center that you can't see and feel and touch, how do you know it's going to be safe? And every organisation that we work with needs to think about that. But I'm very confident in saying that Office 365 does have very strong privacy and security controls. The data centers are completely locked down. There's video cameras. There's fingerprint and biometric sensors to get in there. There's intrusion detection systems to make sure that the right people, you can't get in via the internet, and there's also very strong privacy controls. It's accredited to a range of different privacy standards, whether that be the International Standards Organisation 27001, the EU Model Clauses, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or the Financial Management Acts. There's a whole range of different independently verified standards and controls that Office 365 has been accredited to, and certainly when I've looked at Office 365 versus other similar cloud services, Office 365 is significantly in front in terms of independently verified controls that ensure that your data is protected. You do own all and retain your rights to all your data. One of the questions that I'm sometimes asked is if I want to get off Office 365 and go to something else, can I get my data out? Yes, you can. Right? Microsoft will provide you, even though it's at no cost, so you can just keep it there, but will provide you with access to be able to remove your data for up to 30 days after if you were a paying client, for up to 30 days, or you've got all your data and it's very easy to extract that. And Microsoft have publicly said that they have no rights to their data and it's owned by yourself. While an Australian data centre has been announced, so that's a recent announcement, today data is stored offshore. Many organisations, including in Australia the Queensland Government, have chosen to use Office 365, and that indicates that other organisations feel that it's appropriate. But its suitability does depend on what information you intend to store and your funding agreements. I'm not going to go into privacy law, but but for instance, many organisations that provide health services are less comfortable about storing client data offshore in the Office 365 cloud. Organisations that provide community development services, almost everyone that we've started to work with or worked with has decided to move into the Office 365 cloud because of the benefits it provides. If you receive government funding, some of your government contracts may require you to store data in certain areas, but we've got many organisations that have migrated to 365, both that provide services to state and federal governments. Are there any other questions at this point, or should I keep moving?
Yes, Marcus, we do have a couple of questions here. The first one is from Graham.
Yeah.
Given the MS Security Suite that comes with Office 365, what further security do you need on-site beyond the firewall for local network protection?
Every organisation that we've seen answers that differently. And I'm not going to give you a black and white answer. It comes down to how concerned you are about, and by security I'm presuming you mean virus protection, it comes down to how concerned you are and how well your staff adhere to good practice in terms of downloading files off the internet, and whether or not you have client PC or visitor PCs that potentially clients can come in and use. We've seen a number of organisations be very comfortable with Microsoft Security Essentials, and that's what they use for virus protection. Connecting Up has Semantic and other virus protection software available at very reduced rates from commercial products, and we see a lot of organisations using those as well. Some organisations also pick cloud-based antivirus products if they don't have a local server and need the efficiencies that come with central cloud management. So we've seen different organisations use different approaches depending on their risk and their desire to minimise viruses, and all three of those approaches are valid.
Great. Another question here from Margaret. If you run servers and Exchange Server locally, can you have some staff using Office 365 and others use the local server?
Margaret, the short answer unfortunately is not easily, unless you set up separate mail domains. You can do it with synchronization tools, but we don't recommend it. If there's a need for that, you're better to separate your mail domains and treat them separately, or to just bite the bullet and decide to use one or the other is our general, is our broad recommendations without knowing the detail.
Last question before we move on from Peter. Does Mac uses the same cloud storage server as Windows?
So Peter, yes, the Mac does use the same storage. The back end is identical. Many organisations we work with have both Macs and Windows and sometimes Linux PCs as well. And the back end is exactly the same. If you're buying Office, obviously the Office for Mac is a different version. It's currently, the latest version is 2011, whereas for PC/Windows it's 2013.
That was the last question, Marcus. Thank you.
Fantastic. I will keep going. So, while Office 365 might be free, from an ongoing service cost perspective, there's always effort required to migrate to Office 365. And one of the things is always to think about, how do you build the business case? Where are you going to get value? Because at the end of the day, either someone's got to spend time on it, or you've got to pay someone to migrate you into Office 365. So it may cost you migration. There may be a cost in the migration. And there's 5 separate ways that we've seen people build a business case for 365. The first one is reducing or eliminating server upgrades and refreshes. And what that does is, if you upgrade your server every 3, every 5 years, or whatever it is, you'll save the hardware costs associated with that, and you'll save the software costs associated with that, and you'll save the labour costs, which is normally the largest proportion of any server upgrade cost. So that saves you significantly in terms of how you build that business case. The second way is video conferencing applications and teleworking structures to provide flexibility and reduce travel costs. We know of one organisation that completely justified the cost of migrating to Office 365 through stopping using a video or a teleconferencing solution, which because they were a distributed organisation all around Australia, and they used to use teleconferencing all the time to stay in touch with their staff and also to have team and whole of organisational meetings. Migrating to Office 365 reduced that cost to zero, allowing them to, which covered the cost in less than a year of the migration to Office 365. It also allows staff to telework much more effectively. I was told the story the week before last of an organisation that said, when staff have a sick child or they need to work from home for whatever reason, Office 365 allows them to telework effectively, which allows them to reduce cost significantly or allows staff to still be effective if they want to work from home for the day. The third way is it defends against hardware failure. With cloud solutions and Office 365 specifically, there's no need to worry about your server failing. Your data is always protected in the cloud, and that can give you significant productivity benefits over and above other local solutions. Collaborating effectively can also be lead to some significant productivity benefits. What we've seen is that allowing staff to find documents easily rather than having to search emails or having to search a file server that's difficult for people that aren't in the central office to access means that there's a lot less time wasted looking for the right documents, and people can collaboratively edit a document effectively, saving a lot of time and allowing them to spend more time with clients and less time working with documents. And the single source of truth is the last one, because one of the challenges we've also seen is finding those files where they might be stored if you don't have an effective filing structure or a solution that allows staff to work anywhere can be a real challenge. So our top 10 tips for successful implementations if you're looking to implement or migrate to Office 365. The first one is, and this is particularly relevant if you've got staff at multiple locations, which is explain the benefits to staff at all locations and support them to make the change. Local champions can really help to make the most of any new features that you're looking to get to maximise. The second one is ensure your internet bandwidth and reliability is suitable. One of the challenges that we do see is that, or one of the things that we don't enjoy is organisations that ask us to assist when Office 365 is not working well for them. And one of the issues, or one of the most common issues, is they haven't invested in some additional internet bandwidth if they want to use things like video conferencing regularly. And so thinking about your internet bandwidth and is it suitable and making sure it's appropriate is really important. Number 3, make effective use of OneDrive for offline file access. I briefly touched on this earlier. OneDrive is a fantastic tool in terms of ensuring that you can access your files when you're traveling or in areas with poor internet connectivity. But you will need to, on those rare occasions, where people have modified 2 documents simultaneously offline, manage those sync issues. The third one is consider upgrade, or fourth one, sorry, is consider upgrading Office on your PCs, because one of the, if you're looking to migrate to Office 365, as a rule of thumb, you will need to either touch each PC somehow, that can be remotely, to configure it to talk to Office 365. If you're doing that, it's often a good time to upgrade Office to the latest version on your PCs. Number 5 is use an Office 365 expert to help make the transition a success and to assist with ongoing support if required. If you don't have in-house IT staff, or don't think that Office 365 will allow you to operate effectively without any external IT support, Office 365 should significantly reduce your need for support if you're eliminating local servers, but you always need a trusted expert ongoing. And one of the challenges is in planning the migration, it generally goes a lot smoother if you have the advice of someone that's been through it before. Number 6, in terms of top tips for successful migrations, is consider local storage if you share large videos or quantities of photos. If you do video editing, it's probably not appropriate to do that in the cloud, particularly if they're large videos. And so you do need to think about local storage options. And if you are thinking about local storage options, you also need to think about a backup strategy for those. Reviewing your security controls and policies is the next one. One of the great things about Office 365 is that your information is accessible anywhere. One of the challenges about Office 365 is that your information is accessible anywhere. And so for organisations that might share passwords, although I suspect there won't be any on this particular call, then that's a risk if you're moving to Office 365 and you need to look at changing those policies and making sure those policies are appropriate and that people are following them to make sure that there is Office 365 will enforce strong passwords, but you need to make sure you have other good practices in place, like don't write them down, change them regularly, etc. Number 8 is, for those of you that are a bit more technical on the line and or who have larger organisations, is that there is still often value in a server if you have a larger number of computers because of the management and group policy opportunities that Active Directory offers you. Number 9 is that headsets minimises potential issues during video and audio conferencing. That sounds pretty simple, I suspect, to many people on the call, but one of the challenges that we do see, or complaints, when people are starting to use Link for audio and video conferencing, when we drill into poor sound quality issues, we find that people are using old like laptops and old speakers, and just buying a headset makes a huge difference, particularly if you're in an open plan environment. And number 10 is that online collaboration spaces can be really valuable to engage your board or engage your volunteers more effectively, and they can be built easily with a SharePoint solution. I'll pause in case there's more questions.
Yes, Marcus, we have a lot of questions that have come up. So this was regarding the number 8, point number 8. Question from Chrissy. Where a server may still be useful, what would you say would be a larger number of computers?
Chrissy, if you've got more than 50 computers, I would absolutely say yes. If you've got more than 20 computers, possibly yes. It also depends whether you're on Windows 8 or on Windows 7. It is an influencing factor in that decision. Sometimes you still need a server for your finance application or for the storage of large videos, but consider it if you've got more than 20. It's highly likely to be useful if you've got more than 50.
Moving, a question from Roland. In our organization, ICT tells us that SharePoint is too expensive. As a result, we are purchasing a variety of platforms that don't seem to be integrated. Is there any business case studies on this?
Roland, none spring. I have seen business case studies on SharePoint versus others. I can try and dig some out if you share your contact details separately, and I can get back to you. None of them spring to mind. Without knowing the details of what your costs are, it's really hard to say definitely. SharePoint you can do very cheaply and easily, or you can do significantly and largely. It very much comes down to what your requirements are and how much work you want to put into it.
Another question here from Mitzi. How is video conferencing different from GoToMeeting? Hello, Marcus.
Sorry, you just dropped out there. Yes?
Sorry. How is video conferencing different than GoToMeeting? This is a question from Mitzi.
Yep, so video conferencing allows, they are very similar. GoToMeeting is more usually used, but not always, for larger group meetings with multiple participants. But video conferencing is just like, another way of thinking about video conferencing is Skype. You can have one-to-one or 1-to-5 or one to multiple people, and connect in with and see them and talk to them as if you're in the room.
A question here from Mike. Will Office 365
Yep.
Will Office 365 allow me to dispense with my file server? There are still other Microsoft apps like Project, Visio, etc. that are required as well as other non-Microsoft apps.
So we've worked with many organisations that have dispensed with their file server by moving to Office 365. One of the things that we recommend is that you still purchase the desktop version of Office from Connecting Up. So that's, I think, about $26 in Australia for Office 2013, for instance, and install it on all your PCs. The reason for that is that it means that you work without reliance on the internet. And so if you've got Microsoft Project, for instance, installed on your PC, you can store your Microsoft Project files in your SharePoint area and still work with those very effectively.
A question here from Linda. Can two people work on the same document in SharePoint at the same time?
Linda, I'm very happy to say that yes, two people can work on the same document in SharePoint at the same time. And that's been very useful for me when I've got a funding submission due in tomorrow and I haven't quite finished it.
Wonderful. Question here from Chris. In terms of PCs, why would we have two versions, that is Office 365 cloud-based and then a local 2013 Office version?
You don't need to have two versions, so you can use the online versions of Word, Excel and PowerPoint and just use those in Office 365. As I've said just prior, I recommend that for almost all organisations they still purchase the PC or desktop versions of Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. And the reason for that is it's faster, you're not reliant on internet connectivity, and you can still use it if the internet goes down, and it's only $26. If you're paying for-profit rates or full retail rates of $400 to $500, I wouldn't be saying that, but for $26 I usually see it as worthwhile. If you decide to purchase the E3 plan, that includes the desktop versions as well.
Last question before we move on with the presentation. This is from Peter. We have 10 PCs and Mac systems in our training club. Is ADSL 2 Plus strong enough to support smooth connectivity? We have good download bandwidth speed.
And the short answer to that is depends what you're doing. If you're just using it for email and a bit of internet, ADSL 2 Plus is fine. If you want to have 10 video conferences going at the same time, or to have then ADSL 2 Plus is unlikely to be good enough. And so yes, it can be, but you must ensure that you are not trying to use your internet connection too heavily.
That was the last question, Marcus. We can move on with the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'll keep going. So I did just want to briefly talk about a case study with Regional Sports Network Victoria. RSNV is a state-based organisation or state-based group of organisations that are made up of 9 separate organisations. They provide services to all sporting organisations and clubs all around Victoria. They've got 60 staff and up to 100 volunteers, and I think they cover about 2.5 million square kilometres, so very distributed organisation. And some of the things that they said once we migrated them to Office 365, when we said what are the real benefits, they said the first one is there was a lower technology risk. You know, there was guaranteed availability. They knew the server was going to be up. They knew that it was managed. They knew that they had their data stored across 2 data centers. There was an automated, backup was automatically looked after. No longer did someone have to remember they had the old USB hard drives that someone would have to take home every night. So no longer did someone have to do that and check the backup emails to make sure that the backup was successful. And they said that that meant that they had a lot of confidence in the fact that their technology would work and it would continue to work. They also saw significant time savings in the order of 10 to 15%, and that very much came from travel savings, because there used to be a lot of time spent travelling between different locations for meetings, and from being able to find information easily. The third benefit that they reported was happier staff, which really surprised me, because it's not often you hear that from an IT system. And how they explained it was people work at RSNV because they are passionate about sport. And if they can help sporting clubs around Victoria and help them quickly, and they're able to find the information they need to answer their question, then it really makes their day. And Office 365 allowed them to store their information centrally and also to easily access sporting experts, because there was a number of, they all moved on to Office 365, and get answers to questions readily within the RSNV network. And that actually led to people that were happier in their jobs, because no longer did they feel like they're wasting as much of their time trying to find the right version of a document or trying to find the answer to a question that they're pretty sure that someone else knows. And so they were the 3 core benefits that they saw in terms of coming from Office 365. In terms of resources to help you in your journey, if you're interested in taking it further, the Info Exchange and Connecting Up have an Office 365 readiness assessment, which looks at things like internet bandwidth, the version of Microsoft Office you have on your desktop, which looks at your capacity to upgrade, and there's some links to those on the slide deck. Anyone can go and sign up for Office 365 today at Microsoft, and you can migrate yourself if you have the confidence, and there's the link to that, microsoft.com/Office365 nonprofits. And there's also the Microsoft Trust Center, which, in addition to the links that I provided on the earlier privacy and security slide, answers a lot of questions that people have about privacy and security. More than 95% of the questions I get asked around privacy are answered in non-technical terms on that in the Microsoft Trust Center. And the last one is improveit.org, which is a website where there is a range of different resources to help your organisation get the most value from your technology investment, including good practice guides and IT planning advice, those sorts of things. That's it. Oh, final thoughts, sorry. So Office 365 can enable you and your organisation to share information, to work effectively irrespective of location, to reduce your infrastructure costs, to telework effectively, and improve your capacity to operate effectively in the off chance, and I hope it never does, a disaster strike, whether that be fire, theft or something else. So it can make a real difference to organisations. I'll hand back to you now, Sakina, for any other questions.
Yes, Marcus, we do have a couple of questions. Can you provide a list of Australian users of 365 or even just government agencies?
I don't have a list of Australian users. I only have a list of organisations that we've migrated ourselves, plus the case studies on the Microsoft site. So the organisations that we've migrated ourselves, some of those were listed on the earlier slide, so they're in the slide deck. The only government agency in Australia that I'm aware of at this point in time is Queensland Government, but I know a range of other government agencies are considering and looking very closely at it.
A question from Bradley. Can an Access database be stored and used on OneDrive, or should we run it locally and then sync the database to OneDrive?
You can store an Access database in SharePoint if it is compatible. There is checkers available if you Google for it. So depending on how old the Access database is, it may or may not be compatible with SharePoint storage. So you start with that as the starting point. Look and see if you can readily, it may already just work by loading it up on SharePoint, or it may need some work. If it needs some work and that's more than is cost effective, then you can just run it locally and copy it and have a separate process for backup, etc.
A question here from Chrissy. What is the difference between E1 and E3?
I haven't covered that because that's normally covered, I think, in the other presentation. In a nutshell, there's lots of differences, but the big ticket items is that E3 includes the applications, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint for tablets and mobiles. E3 also includes a lot of more complex email archiving, security, legal hold functionality, and E3 also includes some additional functionality if you want to integrate with telephony or voice systems.
That was our last question, Marcus, here. Do you want to say any last few words?
No, look, my contact details are up on the screen there. You can see my email address. So if there is anything else, don't hesitate to contact me. We see at Office 365, it's not right for every organisation, but it can dramatically change the way your staff work, and it can significantly reduce the cost of your technology infrastructure. And so we encourage all non-profits, because of the price point, to consider it. Yeah, best of luck with your technology endeavours, and I hope you found the presentation useful.
Marcus, as we speak, we do have a question here from Mitzi. How do we find out more about Link?
There's lots of information on Link on the internet. So if you just Google Link and Microsoft Office, what I usually say to people that if you're familiar with Skype, you're also familiar with Link. Link just has some added benefits and features, and it's designed for business rather than for individuals. But if you're familiar with Skype or with Google Chat, you're actually familiar with Link already.
Wonderful, Marcus. So thank you, Marcus, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you each and every one of you who could join us today. You will be receiving an email with a link to the recording and slides by end of day today. I will also include a link where you can register for our upcoming webinar on Introduction to MS Office 365. Our next webinar is going to be on the 2nd of July. So until next time, thank you and bye-bye.